So I think right now what I want to talk about is what it looks like as a designer, for instance, when you really don't have a process, a specific one, something resembling a methodology, and we don't have steps in order to understand what you're doing. So my first real job, I guess, coming out of school was I was the staff designer at a nonprofit art center called Intermedia Arts. And I was constantly racked with creative block while I worked there. You know how like people tell you to go take a walk, like that'll help it? I just went for tons of walks. The only thing that really fixed it was, like anyone with creative block, but when you have a deadline, at the last minute, you think of some solution, and then of course, you can suddenly deliver the work. Really, the reason that is not that you're so smart and work so well under pressure. It's that when there's a deadline and a fear of consequences, it shuts down the bullshit conversation that you've been having that kept you from coming up with an idea. So here's what it would look like when I would start a project there. So typically I would have probably close to 2 weeks to have to show anyone anything, which is an amazingly luxurious amount of time to reflect upon now. So I get a project, and so let's think of a good example. I think a good one was there was a program there called the Encyclopedia of Hip Hop Education. I can't remember. It was this is like 2004, so forgive me for my memory. Can't totally remember. But excuse me. But basically what would happen, it was a series of workshops, and I think there was a series of events. So the workshops were in things like lyric writing, breakdancing, probably graffiti, stuff like that. If they want to say, there were, say, 4, and then they would do like a concert a month at this space. And so I get this thing kicked off to me. I have loved hip-hop for as long as I can remember. You know, since the first time I saw Run DMC and the Walk This Way video. So I have this like deep attachment to it. So I get this project, and already there are the seeds of a problem there, which is that I want, right off the bat, I want to do something good and original. I don't think about what the project needs. I don't think about what it is that they're trying to say. My concern is this: I love hip hop. I want to do something that reflects on it in a new light. Considering what a fucking shitty designer I was anyway, that was exactly the wrong place to start. And what actually happened was I started a million versions of that mailer. It was like a small poster, like an 11 by 17 poster that could then fold down and get mailed. I must have done a million versions of it. And I'd start it, it wouldn't work, it wouldn't look right. You know, I'd have like a super rough sketch, and the second I had a rough sketch, I'd start doing it. And in the end, what I ended up doing was I had these photos me and my wife were making of painted over graffiti, which, you know, kind of ends up looking like these monochromatic Mark Rothko paintings. And so I took those and some hand-drawn type, and my logic was something about reinventing the language of graffiti. Some pompous idea that helped me finish it. Now, unfortunately, I had to wait. I was late in presenting it. So when I actually went to print it, I printed it in kind of an army green on this rough kind of craft paper. My thinking being like, it's rough and gritty and something. But I didn't have time to get a drawdown. So the final thing, while being cool, was super low contrast. Just not my proudest moment. And that was probably a highlight of my crappy tenure at Intermedia Arts. So, what did I do wrong there? The very first thing I did wrong was I worried about the end product. And that sounds crazy, right? It sounds like you should want to do good original work. But the problem is that in doing so, you hobble the process. Because instead of focusing on the moment that you're at right now, what am I going to do right this minute? You're focusing on the end. Like, imagine if you're supposed to train for a marathon and you need to build up to it, right? And you're like, shit, I gotta run a marathon and I gotta win. And your very first idea is, I will just take off right now and run a marathon today just to prove I can do it. And try to break the record of the speed or whatever. You're gonna be in the hospital. And then you're not gonna be able to trade for months. And you can be all messed up. When if that's a serious goal, what's the first step? The very first step is put some sneakers on. And the next step is get comfortable running, see how far you can actually run without dying, and do some research into how do people train for marathons. Those are the first steps. That's where you start. You don't start by actually doing the thing. I'm sure somebody does. I'm sure some lunatic somewhere does, and good for them. But in general, you start at the beginning and you do the first things. So worrying about the thing being good is a prime form of not starting at the beginning. On top of that, it's a ridiculous thing to worry about. I joke all the time that my work was terrible. My work was terrible because of the process. The one thing I was lucky about is that by constantly changing my mind and being insecure, I tried a million things. Formally, my work was strong. It wasn't actually going to be bad anyway. It's just the process was going to be lacking. So that's step number one. God, this is a long video for a dude who's at step number one. What should I have done? What I should have done was start at the start. That would involve asking very explicitly, what is this mailer supposed to accomplish? Is it supposed to entice you into doing this thing? Is it supposed to just raise awareness? Is it supposed to, who knows? Is it supposed to actually get you to go straight down to Intermedia Arts and write a check? Is it for kids or is it for parents? What is the point of this thing? That is not a question I actually knew the answer to. We would fill out these little marketing sheets, but none of us were marketers, so I don't really think they were all that effective. So that was problem number one. I didn't know what the intent was, and to that extent, if I had asked those kinds of questions, I probably would have had less time to have creative block, because I would have been more focused on, all right, well, let's work harder on the messaging. Because the stuff that we made, it was typical in that it didn't serve a marketing function at all, other than that we put it into the world. It was really not good because we never worried about whether the content was truly capable of connecting. We didn't worry about whether there was a headline that was enticing. We didn't really ask whether we were saying things that normal human beings cared about. We did the really typical thing, which is like, you're a curator or a program director or a teacher. This is your program. Write the copy. No one really ever asked those hard questions. When you start asking those hard questions, I don't think you care nearly as much about what the thing looks like, so much as what it reads like. So that's the next thing. After that, though, having those pieces of information, I went into the project with no insight from which to build a concept. So all my ideas were formal ideas, or they were loosely based around hip hop. And the other problem was I would come up with one idea and one, either shoot it down before I even got on paper, or two, jump right into it. What I would do if I was doing the same project today, I would ask those questions, and then I would start thinking about what this program means. I wouldn't think at all about hip hop. At least not in the beginning. I would just think about the program. Like, what are these kids doing? What is it about? What does it make happen, like, in the community or in the lives of the kids who do it? So those kinds of questions would then possibly lead to an insight. Like, the insight might be about passing down knowledge. Okay, cool. Passing down knowledge would be the kind of thing, especially it's called Encyclopedia of Hip Hop Evolution. So I didn't even use that, though, as like a potential insight. So, you know, passing down knowledge, let's say, that could be expressed in a million ways. Another thing could be, I don't know, learning a new skill, fostering a community, providing direction or subculture to a kid that's directionless or has no subculture. Any of those things then could have been an insight. From the insight, you can develop a ton of ideas. So when I'm kind of routinely in these videos advocating for the idea of, like, if you're a designer, you should do like 20 ideas or 15 options, it's because I think that once you have the insight, you should be in a position where 5 to 10 solid concepts per insight is easy. That shouldn't be hard. Not if it's a real solid insight. But I didn't have those. I had very shallow concepts where the execution and the insight were wrapped up in each other, and therefore I couldn't develop a bunch of ideas, because at best I could do like a version that was 2 colors, or a version that was 1 color, or a version that was like used a duotone versus silver. I don't know. Very kind of shallow differentiation between the ideas. All right, just got really windy. Hold on 1 second. I'm gonna try putting my hand slightly different, see if I can just block that wind. So let's get some light in there. That help? Yeah, sure. So that stuff is missing. And it's asinine now, because the same person was doing that project in 2005, and now I'm thinking about it, and those insights popped into my head in seconds. I promise you, it's not like I've been thinking about this project for 13 years and how I would do it differently. It's that the way I thought about projects then was wrong, and that's why I did work that was constantly not done until the very last minute and whatnot. And blah blah blah. This is a long one. I don't know. Maybe pause it and get a beer or something. But that insight leads to those ideas, and then So the very first thing I should have done is I should have just had lists. Just lists of ideas. And then once I had the insight, you go, okay, cool. You can develop a concept around the insight. And then I could have done visual research into the language of how I felt I should be communicating. You know, what does hip hop look like right now? What do nonprofits look like right now? What is, I don't know, other youth subculture stuff look like? Punk rock, basketball, graffiti. And then I could start to sort of map out a terrain and say like, okay, strategically to get attention and communicate, what should this thing look like? Where should it be borrowing from? How should it be hyper contrasty? Or should it look sporty? That's not how I thought then. And so then it would be like, okay, cool. Like I'd have the insight. From the insight, I should be able to come up with, I mean, if I were to do the same project now, I'd probably come up with 10 concepts and then try to get 5 of them into a rough visual form. And then I would show those to people. And if any of those didn't work, I would just go back up into my list of 10, grab a couple more. So, and then the stylization of them would be based on my visual research and based on the thesis I was going to have, you know, whether it should be contrasty, whether it should look subculture, whether it shouldn't, whether it should look professional, whether it should look amateur, whatever. And in doing that, I would have made good work. There's no guessing about it. That's not a theory. That's what would have happened. I would have made good work having done that. Chances are I would have gotten somewhere I didn't expect to get. Who knows? It may have ended up being a project that was more photographic, because that insight might have led to an idea of, oh, well, what if we show this? And then I could have set up a photo shoot. And then all of a sudden, my portfolio, that at that point was completely lacking in photography, would have suddenly had a project in it that might have had art-directed photography, which would have been really good at that stage of my life. So that's how I would approach the exact same project now, and I would have zero angst about it. In those days, every project filled me with angst. It didn't matter how many weeks I had to do it, I knew it wasn't enough. I thought I was thinking about the concept, but I don't think that I was. Because I wasn't really thinking about the function. So in my mind, the function was like, well, it's going to be a postcard in coffee shops, or it's going to be in a window. But I didn't think about, what do I want the person who gets this to do? I didn't influence the language. You know, I'd bitch and moan that something was too long and ask the curator or the program director, hey, I need you to kill 8 words. Like typical narrow tunnel vision graphic designer crap. Not, hey, it's unclear what you want someone to do. It's unclear what they're going to do in this class. It's unclear what value they get out of this class. Like those kinds of questions. I don't even know if I read the copy, if I'm being completely honest. So that's the big difference between how I designed from when I first started designing as like a hardcore kid, skater, graffiti kid in 1997, 1996 or whatever, through to art school. Nothing I'm talking about came up in art school ever, period, end of discussion. Didn't matter who taught the class. And really into, I want to say 2011, 2012, so almost a solid decade after graduating, that's when I started to get a clue. And even then, that stuff didn't really come together until maybe a year and a half, 2 years, yeah, probably about 2 years ago. That's the point at which I can definitively say I got good. My formal skills have always been good. The ability to come up with an idea wasn't terrible. It's just that I don't think they came from the right place, and I judged them too hard. What's the point of making a 20-minute video? The very first thing is to say, you gotta stop thinking that stuff has to be good. You gotta start operating from the assumption that you have whatever technical skills you have. Ultimately, that's what you mean by good. You mean one of two things. You either mean you have technical skills, or that it's gonna impress people, which you can't control, or that it looks like other stuff that you've deemed good. None of those make it good. It's a very good argument that if it fits really well on your favorite blog, it's a miserable failure. There's a really good argument if the first thing I see is your technical abilities, it's a miserable failure. And there's a good argument to be made that if other people are fawning over it, but it's not moving the dial for its intended function, miserable failure. The whole idea of function before form, that's not what I'm advocating for here. I'm not advocating for some like return to a Paul Randian working style, because frankly I think Paul Rand was hit or miss. Formally he was good. Conceptually you can tell when he didn't have an idea, so he did his fucking handwriting. When I didn't have an idea, so what I did at Intermedia, if I didn't have an idea, especially if you annoyed me, you got 3 columns of accidents grotesque. That was your punishment. Later, when I started to get more confident and work faster, my default, my version of the Paul Rand handwriting was all caps accidents grotesque with either like super minimal rule lines or color blocking. And that's what I did every time I didn't have an idea. It's not great. It's not a good way to work. And people will tell you that if you're that you should have a style you can fall back on. That there's a certain truth to that. For example, it is really great if you're non-format and you've got this style you're developing. But if your goal is to come up with concepts and execute against those concepts, and then you have a style you're falling back on, that right there is proof that your process does not work. It's not consistent. Like, here's the deal. I'm walking by a bunch of nice lawns here. If you mow the lawn and it doesn't consistently cut the grass down, then whatever you're doing is not working. It means you don't actually understand the process of mowing the lawn. It seems like a silly example, but clearly you don't, because otherwise every time you cut it, the results would be the same. If you're designing and sometimes you have an idea and sometimes you have 10 ideas and sometimes you're doing all caps accidents, or you know, I think a really big thing that people love to do with this is like a kind of neo-Swiss thing. If that's a consistent place that you end up at, then you don't have a process. You don't know what your process is. You don't know what separates the things that work from the things that don't work. And what you probably do is you blame, when you do the stylistic thing, on a lack of information from the client or from some third party, or a lack of time or whatever. I mean, if we think back to earlier in this video, which this video is crazy long, I don't know what's going on, and I'm talking about, I'm trying to get this brighter. Let's see if we can make it brighter, can we? Oh well, we can't, but screw it. And I'm talking about the steps that I could have taken to do that Intermedia Arts project. I could have had, if I had to, at least one working version by the end of the second day. If I could just do pencil sketches, I could easily have, I would say, 10 solid sketches by the end of the second day. Only because of knowing concretely the steps. Questions, information gathering, research. Once you have the research, you analyze it, you find your insights. If you can't find an insight, you get more research. Now, if you really can't find an insight because you really don't have enough time to dig further in, then you have alternate methods of generating concepts. And maybe you even have a methodology for generating unexpected form rather than your fallback style. When you hit those moments where you straight up are like, I can't come up with an idea and I don't have time. Because like, that's another thing I have now. If I legitimately, like if I have a project with total creative freedom and I don't feel like coming up with an idea, I'm not gonna go, oh, I should do like some style I like or whatever. I have a methodology for working in those instances. Again, a set of steps and processes that when executed consistently will lead to unexpected, exciting results. None of this is bragging. The thing that drives me insane about all the stuff I talk about is, in my assumption, in any room, I'm the dumbest guy in the room. So if I'm talking about process and you're watching this, my assumption is this shit totally works for me. I can clearly see that other people need it. And imagine, sorry, I just got scared by an animal. Imagine the damage that they will do when using what I'm talking about. You know, like, I assume if you're watching this, you're actually smarter than I am. You're better at this shit than I am. And if you start applying process and start picking it apart and really getting it to work for you, you'll be incredible and unstoppable. That's what I think of my students. You know, like most of my students, I already tend to be like, they're better than I am. But the thing that they're missing is process. And the thing is, like, process does not come with age. Like, the stuff that I'm talking about and applying, I only figured out in the last 2 to 3 years. The application is, it could have been applied at any point in my career. There's no reason, like, if I teach high school kids tomorrow, which I've done, that's the process that we'll use. Because it's not an age thing. It's not like you unlock the mysteries of the mind at 40. I'm trying to get you in the light so you can see me again. That's not how it works. It's the stuff I'm talking about, always been true. It's been true since the moment I started graphic design. It holds up to scrutiny. And the important thing is, like, there's these big overarching principles. You start at the start, you do one step after the other, you reserve judgment, you have a funnel. So you start out with lots of research, you organize that, you whittle it down to however many insights, you generate ideas out of those, you then go through and go like, what's the 10 best ideas? Then you cut that down further and you go like, okay, out of those, like, how would I execute these? Are there any that are not executable given the time frame? And then from that, bare minimum, you have 3 solid ideas. More likely, you get 10 or 20. And then you pick however many you feel comfortable showing. Let the client pick at that point. It no longer matters. Like, that whole thing where you have a favorite You know, you have the favorite, the runner-up, and the safe bet. They always pick the safe bet, or they ruin the favorite with the attributes of the safe bet. I mean, just the fact that you would go into a meeting and not have only things that you thought were awesome and were super happy with and were excited to continue further with, like, that's insane. You should be able to go into any meeting with only shit that you think is awesome, and with stuff where you don't like any one version more than the other because you haven't had time to get overly attached to one concept. Instead, you've got 10, they're all awesome. You let the client pick. And if the client really can't pick, you're like, oh, fine. You pick like it's a begrudging problem. Like, you don't even want to have to make the decision. And you don't have to sell the client. Like, that's the worst thing, right? When you have one idea, you've got to sell the client. When you've got 3, but you don't really like 2, then you've got to sell them on the 1. Fuck selling them. When you have 10 and they're all equally good and you don't feel a way one way or another, there's no need to sell them. The other thing is, you know how you got to the 10. So if they don't take any of them and they can articulate why, you go, cool. You jump back as many steps as you need to and you just move forward again. It's not stressful because you're not all wrapped up in that one masterpiece that you created. So it was not my intent to make a 30-minute lecture on design process, but I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them. Feel free to send me a message or follow me on Instagram. It's MVA Joshua. You can send me a DM through that. If you're trying to get more tactical with this, I can help you. Or if you want to talk through process, you know, DM me. I will send you my phone number. We can chat for 20 minutes or something and just try to figure out, like, what's the stumbling block and, like, what is it that is causing you to constantly change stuff at the last minute, or why do you think you can't come up with more than one idea? Stuff like that. All right, thanks a lot for watching.